All right, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for spending time with us this afternoon for the Sustaining Barley Webinar Series, where we really hope to just provide a forum for conversation and able to just share really good ideas about how do we want to advance sustainability in the barley and malting industry. So we are actually wrapping up this series today. I know that we had aspirationally, again, maybe one more webinar scheduled for April, but that was really focused on a lot of the nitrogen research that's been just getting off the ground. And Gina and I thought it would be really good to go ahead and punt that to the fall when we have perhaps a little bit more information to share all of you. So just a little bit of a programming note, we won't have a webinar in April. I'm sure many of you are eager to get out in the field anyways. And so we'll pick up these webinars again in October. You can expect a survey from us after this webinar go out this week, just to get some feedback on the topics that we did present on. And also any ideas that you would like to see starting in October when the webinar picks up again. Gina and I have got quite a few ideas already in the hopper, but anything that you would like to see us to bring speakers in on, we would love to be able to provide that. So definitely respond to that survey and share your ideas with us. So with that, I do just want to thank the partners on this series, the Brewing and Malting Barley Research Institute, and then also the Canadian Malting Barley Technical Centre, and then of course the members of my organization, the American Malting Barley Association, for making this series happen. And it's been a really good opportunity, I think. Our core mission at the beginning was really just to spark conversation around barley sustainability, and I think we've done that with 5 really good webinars that all have been very well attended, most of them upwards of 40 people live. And actually, as I looked back at the YouTube channel, we're getting sometimes upwards of 70 views even after the webinar, which I think is just great and just shows the importance of these topics to our industry. So today, as we have been doing, each presentation will last about 20 minutes, hopefully leaving about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end. If you're not already on mute, would appreciate you doing so. But then after our presentations are done, would love for you to come off mute so that we can have a conversation. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Kevin Smith. So if you want to go ahead, Kevin, and share your slides. Kevin is the barley breeder at the University of Minnesota. And as he just said earlier, he's been working on winter barley for 13 years now. And so has been a really foundational researcher, at least on the United States side, when it comes to cold temperature tolerance and winter hardiness. So really grateful to have Kevin here today to share his research and especially how winter barley dovetails into the conversation around sustainability. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Kevin.
Great, thank you, Ashley. So great to be a part of this series. I think it's really a great idea. You guys can see my screen okay? Okay. So as Ashley said, I started out at the University of Minnesota working on spring barley entirely, and actually 6-row spring barley. And so since then, I've switched to 2-row. I started a winter program, even doing some work with naked barley. So I've become kind of an expert at starting new breeding programs. But I want to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing with winter barley, and particularly focusing on the trait of cold temperature tolerance or winter survival, because that's our biggest challenge in trying to deploy winter barley in the upper Midwest. But I want to just start by providing a little bit of rationale, like why are we interested in winter barley, and why in particular was I interested in starting a winter barley program. And really that came out of my interest in thinking about the ways that plant breeders can not only help create new varieties that are, are valuable to farmers and to end users, but how can we use plant breeding to help shape cropping systems that are better for the environment? And it just occurred to me that within the case of barley, there were some opportunities there. I'm part of a larger research group at the University of Minnesota called the Forever Green Initiative. And the goal of the Forever Green Initiative is to create cropping systems that are either combinations of winter annual and summer annual, like double cropping systems, or perennial systems to create continuous living cover on the landscape. So it's a pretty focused mission on how do we create these systems with continuous living cover so that they can deliver a broader range of ecosystem services. So this first slide here, if I just right. There's lots of slides like this that show this sort of rose diagram of ecosystem services. And we're all familiar with, food production. So productivity of the system, that's really important. Selecting for yield, selecting for disease resistance to protect the crop from diseases and produce large amounts of high quality grain. But also there's a whole range of other services that can be the result of the cropping systems that we deploy on the landscape. And the two that I was most interested in the context of developing winter barley was nutrient cycling and soil erosion. So in Minnesota and the surrounding states, corn and soybeans dominate the landscape. They are single crop systems. They're only on the ground for about 3 months out of the year, and the rest of the year the ground is uncovered. And the consequence of that is that you're prone to soil loss, and also those systems tend to be somewhat leaky in terms of nitrogen or nitrates. And so what can we do in barley to improve upon that situation? This is a slide just showing this, zeroing in on Minnesota. One of the big drivers of the Forever Initiative is to improve water quality through new agricultural systems. And this shows you basically the nitrate levels in wells sampled throughout Minnesota. The dark blue dots are those wells that exceed the safe level consumption level for humans, and the light blue ones are detectable and approaching that level. So there's quite a bit of the area of Minnesota that is prone to nitrates leaking into the groundwater. And then on the right side, I've shown soybean acreage. And so soybeans are grown extensively throughout the region, and they obviously are most often rotated with corn. And part of those nitrate levels in the wells are due to that particular crop rotation. But we started thinking about, well, what if we had a winter barley that you could double crop with soybeans? That was sort of our target in our minds. How would that impact the landscape in terms of this managing water quality and soil erosion? So I'm just going to share with you a little bit of results from this winter barley soybean intercropping experiment, double cropping experiment not intercropping, I should say double cropping, experiment that we've done the last couple of years. And I'm not going to go into a lot of the details of the results, but I want to present it as a sort of a visual picture of what we're trying to do. So I need to switch here to a different screen. And hopefully you guys can all see that screen. So what you should see on your screen now is, this double cropping experiment that we planted on the St. Paul campus. You have these large plots. You can see the plots closest to you in this viewing screen are on the left. It's a winter barley plot. It was planted in the fall, and so now this picture is being taken in April. And the blank plots or the fallow plots are where we are planting conventional soybeans to compare. So the experiment was basically to compare double cropping winter soybean or winter barley and soybeans to a conventional soybean crop. So I'm just going to play this time-lapse video, and you can kind of see what's happening. And what you should really notice is the length of time that the ground is bare on the conventional soybean ground. So the winter barley crop is taking off, and we're not going to even plant the soybeans until mid or so spring. So right here in May, I think we're getting close to this. This is the planting date here. So we've just seeded the soybean crop, and of course the barley crop is fully headed out. And you can just imagine the differences that would be in these two systems in terms of that nutrient cycling and potential soil erosion. So some of the factors that we tested in this experiment was the row spacing in the soybean. We also looked at some nitrogen levels to try to get a feel for what those management procedures would do to the system. Now you can see the late planted soybeans are coming in where that winter barley was. And so they are obviously quite a bit further behind the conventional soybeans. Their yields tend to be lower because they have a shorter growing season. But the idea is to look at sort of the combined crops in these systems. So not only do we want to develop the system to manage some of those ecosystem services, but we also want it to be profitable, right? So we want growers to be able to grow it. So we measure some of those things as well. And as I said, I'm not really going to go into the details of the experiment. I wanted to just share with you what our vision is in terms of the breeding efforts. I can say that we did document less nitrates leaving the system in the double cropping system compared to the conventional. Conventional beans did yield higher than the late planted double crop beans, but the total economic value was about the same for the two different cropping systems. We've got more work to do to sort of compare those enterprise budgets, but despite the fact that the double cropping system actually would have had more inputs to it, input costs, the total revenue at the end, profit at the end was similar between the two. So sort of our first attempt at trying to look at the system. There's obviously lots of things that we can do to optimize the system and hopefully improve some of those benefits. But that's where we're at right now with looking at how winter barley could be deployed. So winter barley. So why are we worried about winter hardiness? Well, this is some data over the last 10 years or so. It's winter survival data from the St. Paul campus. A couple of varieties. So MN Equinox is a variety that we released a couple of years ago. And if you were only around for the last 5 years, and some of my students have only been around for the last 5 years, you'd say, winter barley, what's the big deal? It seems to survive every year. Fortunately, I've been around longer than that, and I can remember the years when it was complete winter kill. So there's still a tremendous amount of risk involved in planting winter barley in our climate, and so we need to work on ways to improve winter survival. A lot of that winter survival is due to snow cover and temperature. So these are the environmental factors we know are critical. I'm plotting temperature as those little blue diamonds, and the snow cover is that sort of white shaded area. And what you see is in a year where there was 100% survival, even though we had quite cold temperatures, near 20 below certain days, the days when we had those cold temperatures, we had some snow cover. Even a couple of inches of snow makes a huge difference. Where we had zero survival, we actually had fewer cold days below 0 Fahrenheit. But those days occurred on days when we had very little to no snow cover. And so that really made all of the difference. So that really highlights a challenge we have in our breeding program, is that if we're trying to select for winter survival, if everything dies, we don't have any useful information to base selection on. If everything survives, likewise, we don't have any information. So we really have to plant these trials in a number of different locations and try to find that sort of sweet spot where we can select for things that survive the winter. So I'm going to talk first about this project where we developed this multi-parent mapping population. It's called a MAGIC population, multi-parent advanced generation intercross population. And I won't go into the details, but the basic idea is we had a lot of information from 2 very large genetic studies, a lot of phenotypic data on large panels of winter barleys that we could use to select what we thought were sort of the 8 best parents in terms of providing winter hardiness, but also maybe providing different genes for winter hardiness. And so we took those 8 parents, we crossed them in pairs in the first round of crossing. We took the F1s of those crosses, crossed them in the next round. And then we took those F1s and crossed them in the next round, and then selfed them out to produce about 600 lines in this population. So you can think of it as really just taking these sort of 8 parents and shuffling the deck to mix up all of their genes together. In theory, each of the lines that comes out of this project should have an equal contribution from each of the 8 parents. And my hope was that this would help show us sort of like, well, what's the sort of theoretical uh, maximum in terms of winter hardiness that we can get based on what we know. Obviously, there's probably not, there are things out there that we don't know, but based on what we know from the current mapping studies. So this is just some data from 3 sites where we saw differential survival in this magic population. First site is in Crookston, which is our very severe winter site. We don't really actually do yield trials up there, but we have done just survival trials, single row survival trial things. What you can see is most of the lines, almost 500 of them, were completely winter killed, including our checks, which were very close to that. But then we had a number of lines that did survive, and in this case, we had 31 lines out of the 600 or so that, well, 572 that had greater than 90% survival. So that was quite interesting to see in this really harsh environment. Next, we went to St. Paul, which is a little bit less harsh environment, and you can see that from the distribution on this plot. So we had more lines that survived the winter, still quite a few that winter killed. And in this case, we had about 14 lines that had 90% or better, so quite high survival. And then this is Mead, which is the least severe of the sites where we had differential winter survival. It's in Nebraska. It's certainly not as cold there, but they often have snowless winters, which tend to make it you can have severe winters even in Nebraska. And here we had quite a few individuals that survived at that 90% or better. So what does that mean when you look at the whole thing? We were able to find the sort of the top, 8 or so lines that had very high survival at all 3 of the sites where we had differential survival. So I think that's very encouraging, quite a bit better than the checks and the varieties that are available. And all of this whole population has been planted again in 6 other locations last fall. So within the next couple of months, we'll have another set of data on the same population, and hopefully, when we compile all of that, we'll have at least identified some reasonable candidates that have substantially improved winter hardiness. We've already put a few of these into our crossing block in our breeding program. So I'll talk a little bit about sort of what's happening in the breeding program per se. This is the breeding timeline is on the left, so probably most of you have seen these many times before. It takes like 8 or 9 years to get to the release stage. We make crosses, we develop segregating populations, we advance inbred lines to a set of yield trials, and then eventually into industry testing, quality testing trials that we do with AMBA that go through a pilot at a plant scale stage. Our winter barley program is a full pipeline here, and we actually have 2 lines in the AMBA pilot testing stage that were planted in last fall. So it's the first materials in the program that are really warrant testing in that final stage of industry testing. On the right is a picture of one of our fields in one of those years where we had roughly 0% survival, but we had a few lines that seemed to survive quite well despite the fact that everything else was dead. And this is one of my technicians out there carefully digging up a plant and sticking it in a pot and bringing it into the greenhouse. And we did actually end up crossing to those plants, and a few of those lines are actually in our yield trials now. So you have to sort of take what you can get with winter barley and winter survival. And it's reminded me of a expression that my colleague, wheat breeder across the hallway from me, who used to be a winter wheat breeder, said, he said, you breed till you run out of seed. He was not kidding. If you don't have backup plans, you're going to lose everything in those bad years. All right, and this is just a little glimpse of sort of what's happened in our breeding program for selection. So again, the sort of breeding timeline is over here. On the far right is our year 3 breeding lines. So those were lines that the crosses were made probably about 5 years ago. The year 2 breeding lines, those crosses were made about 4 years ago. And then the year 1 breeding lines, those crosses were made 3 years ago. And what you can see is there seems to be a general trend with the more recent lines in our program having on average a little bit higher winter survival. So that's encouraging because that's been mostly done it's been entirely done through phenotypic selection, sort of taking those different years as we get them to do selection. Um, and then let's see, we are venturing into using genetic marker data to help us in our breeding program. We've been doing that in our spring program for um, quite a few years now. But this year will be the first year we actually are implementing it in our two-row winter program, um, based on data that we've collected over the last few years from our breeding trials. And what this graph is showing you is the predictive ability or the accuracy of our prediction models. So genomic selection, you take a large collection of markers across the genome and you build models to predict an individual's phenotype based on that genetic marker information. So you have large training data sets to build the model, and then you use that model to predict new breeding lines in your program. And so we have isolated DNA out of individual plants in the greenhouse, and we'll be doing selection on those in the next couple of weeks before we go to the field. And what we see is that, for a lot of the traits that we're interested in predicting, we have reasonable prediction accuracies. Usually, I say that if it isn't above 0.4, we probably don't consider it. And so most of these are above 0.4. And what's encouraging, I think, is that winter barley was actually, quite high prediction accuracy. So we're encouraged by that, and hopefully we'll continue to make progress on that. So I'm gonna wrap up that part of today's presentations just by mentioning that we have a really large team of folks that are involved that I've somehow wrangled into working in one way or another on winter barley. I just want to call out Ahmad Salam, who was in Brian Stephenson's lab. He's the one who was really the leader of the effort in that magic population that I showed you some data from. And then Jason Hickman is a graduate student and one of my colleagues, Lab Jake Youngers, who's an agronomist, agroecologist, and that collaborative project was the one that we were working on with the double cropping system work that we did. And then, of course, we have lots of funding support to help keep all this going. So I'm going to stop there. I think we're supposed to pause and wait for questions to the end, right?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kevin. And we will. If you have questions, please just hold on to them and we'll do them all at once Phil gets done presenting. And if you want to go ahead and stop your share, Kevin, then Phil can go ahead and share his slides. Gina, if you want to do your introduction.
Sure, yeah. Thanks, Ashley. As Ashley mentioned, we're really pleased to have Philip Bailey here today. It's not easy to find someone to speak on winter barley in Canada. Phil has worked in seed research, development, and sales for wheat, barley, oats, and soybeans for the past 25 years in Ontario. He is currently the Eastern Business Manager for SeCan, which is headquartered in Ottawa, Canada, and the largest seed company in Canada with sales over 240,000 tons of seed per year. Phil started his career for a small private wheat company in Ontario called C&M Seeds. During this time at C&M Seeds, he was focused on wheat research and variety development before moving into marketing and sales role with the company. In 2006, he joined SeCan as their Eastern Business Manager and is responsible for working with SeCan's 100 member companies across Eastern Canada. His main crops of focus are soybean, wheat, oats, and barley. Phil grew up on a 1,000-acre farm in Northern Ontario, raising beef cattle and growing canola, wheat, barley, and oats. He holds a degree from the University of Guelph, specializing in plant science. Welcome, Phil.
Awesome. Thanks, Gina. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and
Yeah.
Perfect. And can you guys see my pointer when I move that? Okay, perfect. So I'll be using that a couple times. So yeah, thanks Gina and Ashley for the invite. Really interesting presentation by Dr. Smith. I'll certainly be reaching out to you, Dr. Smith, after this presentation, because you'll see by my presentation, we're going the easy route here in terms of what we've been doing in Ontario on winter barley. But anyways, what I thought I would do today is talk to you guys about just our progress with winter barley here mainly in Ontario over the last 8 to 9 years. Just some of our thoughts and insights, and then some of our thinking going forward. So I'll be glad to answer questions at the end of my slides here. So thanks everyone. So just very quickly, I thought I would give a quick synopsis on just who SeCan is. So we're very different, and Gina did a great job of describing it there at the beginning, but SeCan operates quite differently than your traditional seed company. So we're actually a not-for-profit association that represents just over 600 independent grower and processors across Canada. And I will actually say that we do have around 12 US members as well. So typically more so in the western states, northwestern states, where wheat and barley varieties typically will cross the border. So there is a bit of business going on in the US, but I mean predominantly 90% focused here in Canada. Basically, our goal as staff for SeCan is to ensure that new varieties are made available to any seed grower or processor in Canada who wants to have access to them. So that's really our one of our missions there. And what that does, it allows farmers to purchase new varieties from any retailer that they choose with as few restrictions as possible. So that was sort of why SeCan was formed, and we're coming up on our 50th anniversary next year. So been around for a long time, and yeah, largest seller of certified seed in Canada. Our biggest crops are wheat and barley. Obviously in the prairies in Western Canada, those are two large crops. But here in Eastern Canada, we also sell wheat, barley, soybeans, oats, and a few other minor crops as well. But largest supplier of certified seed. This is our slogan, and you can see the little jeans, the jeans banner stand on my slide. So we have our slogan, "Jeans that fit your farm," and basically how we sort of differentiate ourselves is our growers are all local, independent processors, very efficient, very sustainable. We understand the local needs of the local market and very efficient, and are able to offer really good value to farmers. So that's kind of just a quick marketing plug on SeCan. Okay, so today, like I said earlier, I'm going to focus on Eastern Canada and specifically on Ontario, because that's where we've had about 98% of our activity on winter barley. But just to give you a bit of a synopsis on what SeCan does in the East. So currently in Ontario, we have 62 member companies. Quebec, there's 33, and then in the Maritimes, there's 7 member companies. And each of those member companies typically will wholesale out to a much larger network that are kind of the boots on the ground retailers that are working with farmers. So now just wanted to paint a picture on the main crops that are being grown here in Ontario, and to give you just a bit of a historic on what is happening. And one of the reasons why we're focusing in on winter barley is you can see our largest crop in Ontario is soybeans. The last few years, we've been averaging around 3 million acres a year of soybeans. Second largest is corn, which is right around 2 million acres. And then winter wheat is this bluish colored bar, and it's usually averaging around 1 million acres a year, really dependent on the fall. But if the fall is, if Mother Nature cooperates and growers are able to plant their winter wheat behind their soybean, get their soybeans off and then plant their winter wheat, typically we're in that million. And actually this past fall 2024, we probably surpassed the 1 million acre mark just because conditions were favorable. But what's of concern is these bottom bars, and they're kind of all grouped together, but that's our spring grains. So that's spring oats, spring barley, and spring wheat. You can see in the early 2000s, and even if we went into the 1990s, you would see that spring barley was closer to 500,000 acres a year of production in Ontario. And now, this past year, we were looking at around 90 to 100,000 acres. So continuing to drop. There's concern with end users that need barley here in the province on just where that's going to go. So hence the reason why we started to look at winter barley as an option for those growers that were interested. Excuse me. So going into this project on winter barley, what did we know going into it? Well, in Ontario, there was still winter barley being grown. If you back up, say 9-10 years ago, that's how long we've been working on this project. But those varieties, and one of them was what variety that Dr. Smith brought up called McGregor, which was an old variety that was marketed in the 80s. There was no new commercial seed being grown of that variety. It was just essentially farm saved or bin run seed that growers had in their bin, and they were just planting it generation after generation. We knew that winter hardiness was less than winter wheat. As I mentioned, the current, if you back up 8 to 9 years, the winter barley that was being grown were either farm saved McGregor, or even in some cases there was varieties that were coming in from Europe that were unregistered that growers somehow snuck over and were playing around with. The success on the crop was highly inconsistent. So there would be, they would have a successful experience with it, and the following year it would completely winter kill and sour people off, and then a few years later it would come back. But very, very inconsistent. No registration system in place here in Canada. So that was an issue that if we did want to bring something to market, we had to figure that one out. As I mentioned on my earlier slides, spring barley acres were on a rapid decline. So there was concern on just if that was to continue, what was going to happen with barley. We knew that there was a growing awareness on sustainability, cover crop, soil health. So that was something we knew. And then there was this interest in double cropping. And I'm going to show you guys a map of the province here. Now, this one is more focused on optimum planting date for winter wheat. And it was interesting when I was preparing for this presentation today. I think this is a map that was created several years ago, and just with the winters have certainly been much gentler here in the province over the last, say, 10 years. And I think there's actually some interest in updating this map, but you can see the deep southern part of the province, which is quite south if you look at it on a map of, say, North America. The optimum planting date for winter wheat in that deep southern area here is October 16th. But what I can tell you is it's probably 2 weeks later now. So guys will have no issues and have really good success planting wheat in the last part of October, early part of November in that area. And then as we move up to the northern regions, this is actually where I grew up in New Liskeard, you can see if you're going to plant winter wheat up there, you got to get it in end of August. So it just gives you an idea on how the huge difference in the province between the south part of the province, which is much warmer, much gentler, to the northern part. Our thinking on winter barley, if there's going to be success, is it's going to be in this central to southern part of the province. This is where we feel that there's the most high likelihood of success for winter barley. That's where we've been really focusing our efforts on. And especially if you look at this, the London South. So London is a city kind of in the, just a few hours southwest of Guelph. That's where double cropping soybeans really makes sense, and south from there into the Chatham and southern parts of the province. But I'll get into a little more details on that. So basically what I explained earlier, so 1980s, essentially all winter barley research essentially stopped in the province. And then from there on, acreage continued to drop. In the 2000s, there was still a small amount of acreage being grown in the province, but it was all farm saved or unregistered varieties. So in 2017, SeCan decided that we would spend a little bit of money and a little bit of time just looking at germplasm. So Dr. Smith talked about breeding, which is really cool to me, and it's probably the next step we want to make. But we didn't want to invest a lot into this project at first. So what we did is we just searched for germplasm, finished varieties across the world. We ran a private testing site at 2 locations in the province just to see if there was a potential, and which of course there was. 2019, after a couple years of testing, we said, okay, now we need to tackle this registration challenge, because there wasn't one in place. So not that it was a lot of work, but we teamed up with our Ontario Cereal Crop Committee here, and that's the committee that registers all of our spring and winter grains. We partnered up with them and created a registration system that allows people to go through that. And then in 2020, we had the first registration of, I think that year there was actually 6 new products that were introduced. And since then, in the province, still small, but acreage of winter barley has been increasing every year. And it's funny, I said to Gina and Ashley before we started the presentation today that, like since 2017, it's been a successful crop every single year. Now we went from small plots in 2017 to field production, but every single year has been a success. And believe me, there's been some winters where we thought, okay, this is the winter. We're gonna lose everything. And to our surprise, the crops came out of dormancy and looked really good. So we'll see what winter 2025 has in store for us here. It has been a different winter for us. We have way more snow than we have the last 8 to 9 years, which we think is probably a good thing, but also it's just been snow cover for an extremely long period of time as well. So we'll just see what that does. So always learning. So as I mentioned, we searched around the world for germplasm, Europe and the United States. We ran 2 private trials across 2 different locations in Ontario. We didn't have a Czech variety to compare against. So what we decided at first was we would use a very common popular winter wheat variety as our winter hardy Czech. The reason we did that is we just thought, hey, if for whatever reason there was a really, really tough winter and the winter wheat winter killed as well as the winter barley, that would at least give us a bit of an indication that it was an extra hard winter. But as I mentioned, every year everything survives. So we've since eliminated that winter wheat Czech now that we're more comfortable with some of the varieties we're working with. Positive results across multiple testing sites. And so what's kind of next in our plan here was we created that registration system. So what we did is we established 4 sites across the province, and I'll have a map here to show you this here shortly. But 4 registration sites were created. We no longer use there weren't any winter barley Czechs at the beginning, so we used that winter wheat variety called Branson as a Czech for the first couple years until we were comfortable and had varieties that were registered that we then now use as Czechs. Our registration system required 2 years of data, and basically it was very simple: 2 years of data over those 4 sites, and we just needed yields better than our current winter barley Czechs. So this is that Ontario map again. So we basically, for the Ontario Cereal Crop Committee, we divide the province into 4 zones. So area 1 is that deep southern zone, area 2 is sort of central, area 3 is eastern Ontario, and area 5 is northern Ontario. If you can see my cursor, our first site is in a location called Harrow, which is in essentially one of the furthest south locations of the province, sort of down in this neck of the woods. Then we have a site called Tupperville, which is in this location. Another site at Ridgetown College, which is a site affiliated with the University of Guelph. And then our 4th site is kind of call it our winter survival, winter hardy site, which is up more in that central part of Ontario right into here. So those are our 4 sites, and really covering those key areas where we think there'll be the most success for winter barley. Now, having said that, and I have this in a later slide as a challenge, because of the success, now we have guys trying winter barley over here in area 3, which is by me in Ottawa. So Ottawa's right here. Last year there was fields and they had a successful harvest, and now this year they've increased acreage. It doesn't keep me up at night, but it can be a concern because winter is much more difficult in this part of the country than down in the southern part of the province. So we'll see. It's another year, another test. So what I'm sharing with you here is this is the data that was published from what we call our performance trials this past year. So those crops on the left-hand side there, Calypso, Rosina, Pixel, Visual, those are the 4 products that are currently for sale and have been registered here in Eastern Canada. So you can see there's 2 2-rows and 2 6-rows. We've used Calypso and Rosina as our Czechs in the registration trials now, so both 2-rows, which we're going to switch here soon because when Calypso and Rosina were first registered, they were the only ones that we had in the market, so that's what we did. But now we'd like to move towards having both a 2-row and a 6-row as a Czech. It would just make more sense there. So this is the data that comes out of those 4 sites. You can see in terms of mean yields, 7.3 tons per hectare, or if you work in bushels, in that 136 bushels per acre, which is quite good. To give you an idea, so our spring barley trials in the province, not at the same sites, they would be more in the northern, central and northern sites. Our spring barley yields are typically in the 90 to 100 bushel range. So winter barley is in that 136. And now, having said that, in our commercial fields, we have yields getting close to 200 bushels an acre. So quite showing some really quite some quite tremendous yields. And both, I should mention, we're working with both malt barleys and feed barleys. So a mix of both there in terms of what we're testing. That's what we're testing as well. So it's a picture. This is from the Harrow site, the performance site a few years ago. We had one of the challenges with growing these trials is it's the birds can be an issue. So you can see that they put up a number of just like I'm not sure exactly what they are, flashy aluminum things that the birds don't like. So it keeps them away from feeding in these trials, so we can get as good a data as possible. So what have we learned since we started this this fun little project? Well, since 2017, we've it's been essentially a success every year since, and hopefully we're not jinxing ourselves there in this. Like I mentioned earlier, I thought many times that the crop was in trouble, but each time surprised us. I think one of the things we learned, growers that have tried this crop, they were comparing it to winter wheat, and one of the things we learned is winter wheat coming out of winter greens up and really starts to grow much quicker and sooner than winter barley. And so some growers were almost close to ready ripping up their winter barley fields because their winter wheat fields right beside it was green and growing. And what we learned is you need to sit back and wait a little bit longer, and that winter barley tends to wake up, and you're not losing any yield. As I mentioned, yields on new germplasm extremely impressive. We have 2 new products that we're currently increasing, and based on yields from previous year's trials, we're getting closer to the 5 metric ton per acre or 230 bushel per acre range on this new germplasm. Those 2 new lines that we're increasing right now are both from Europe, and they're actually both 6-row varieties. So interested to see if that keeps up. And then double cropping. So in that southern part of the province, especially, a lot of these guys that are growing winter barley are double cropping and having pretty good success on their soybean yields as well. So that's something that's going to continue to be a focus. And it spreads risk and workload. So as farms in Ontario get bigger, up until having winter barley as an option, they were growing a pile of winter wheat. And so what winter barley does is it spreads out the workload, because harvest is typically 2 weeks ahead of winter wheat is usually what they're looking at. So it allows them to get out in the field, get harvesting, get some acres off before their winter wheat is ready to be harvested. So that's definitely a plus for especially for larger growers. So this is just a cool picture showing sort of the maturity differences between winter barley and winter wheat. So this was taken on June 14th. So you can see on the right side there, the winter barley was starting getting closer to maturity than the winter wheat, which, like I say, is typically about 2 weeks ahead of wheat. And then double cropping. So this was taken in 2022 on July 9th, and this was in just north of Guelph. So this was on the northern side of the kind of traditional winter barley area. So they were harvesting their winter barley, and essentially, the drill was in the field at the same time planting soybeans. And I think that crop they yielded around 36 bushels an acre on their soybeans. So they're quite pleased with both crops. And then this was a sort of a cool little project I wanted to share with you guys that we didn't plan to do when we ran some trials in 2024, but we did. So we had a double border row, and so that year we didn't have a lot of snow cover. So what we decided to do was to try and we put some soil probes in the ground, and then also we got a light skiff of snow in middle of March. And so what we wanted to do was see if there'd be any difference if we removed the snow cover on certain plots, and just to compare yields. And you can see there was 2 nights that got down to minus 10 Celsius, which is 14 Fahrenheit. And so we went out even at night and grabbed like a light broom to remove the snow off a few of the plots, and just we're curious to see if there'd be any difference. And I mean, at the end of the day, there was no significant difference between like the snow covered plots and the non-snow covered plots. So just yeah, just trying to learn as we learn on the fly as we move forward. So I thought I'd just end. You know, it's been a really fun, successful project, and yields have been tremendous. And just I thought I would share just some of the challenges now that we're running up against as the crop grows in the province. One of our biggest ones is finding buyers for the crop. So if you remember that slide I showed with barley acres dropping, if a grower in the southwestern part of the province is going to grow barley, he has to make sure he has a marketing plan for that crop, because many elevators in that region will not even accept barley into their elevators. They're typically just accepting winter wheat, corn, soybeans. So we've learned that you know, some growers became frustrated because they put in a few acres but don't have a buyer for it. Same as malt barley. What we're really thinking we need to focus on is the dairy industry, because back in the, you know, in the 90s, when there was a ton of spring barley growing in the province, barley was a quite common part of the ration for dairy farms, but that has since been replaced with corn. So if we're gonna increase acres, we're gonna need to hopefully sit down with these the feed mills and the dairy people and try and reformulate their rations to use a little bit more barley than they currently are. As I mentioned earlier, boundaries are being pushed, which is good. Whenever a grower asks me if he's outside of that kind of traditional area, I say absolutely try it, but you just have to make sure that you're not you know, not getting too aggressive and planting too many acres and having too big of an issue if there was winter kill. But the boundaries are being pushed to the eastern part of the province, even into Quebec now. We have growers in Quebec that are playing around with winter barley. So interesting, but just have to move slow. Another issue that we found out was the aileron color of the barley. So certain varieties have a blue aileron color, and some of the big markets for winter barley is the pet market and food market, and they like a white aileron color. So that's one thing that we're paying attention to. I mean, for the feed market, cattle feed is not an issue, but if you're looking into that pet or food market, then you have to be aware of the aileron color. So just one heads up that we're looking for when we're bringing in new germplasm. And then our last challenge is farm safe seed. Because of the tight turnaround with winter barley, you know, harvested in June, July, and then planted in the fall, there is a tendency to be a higher percentage of farm safe seed. So growers just replanting their own seed rather than purchasing certified seed, which you know, being a small acre crop can create a bit of an issue for return on investment for the breeders and the developers. So we have some ideas on that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but one is what we call a VUA, variety use agreement, which is being put in place in certain parts of Canada and some parts of Western Canada. That's where a grower, when he purchases certified seed the first year, he signs an agreement that essentially, if he does farm save his seed the following year, a small royalty goes back to the developer to pay for the next varieties coming out of his program. So that one's it's a new program, but something that we're working on down the road. And that's it. So that's a little story on winter barley in Eastern Canada. So thank you again, Gina and Ashley, and yeah, hopefully get some questions.
Awesome. Thank you. You want to go ahead? There we go. Stop the share so we can all see each other. Anybody that wants to turn their camera on, and go ahead and come off mute if you have some question. I also try to monitor the chat if you want to drop something in there. But I want to just start a quick question to both Kevin and Phil. Maybe what's the number one thing keeping you from expanding your winter barley development programs? Now, I know funding is always the issue, but maybe what's the more like scientific challenge that you're trying to overcome that you is keeping you from advancing further?
I guess I can go first, Kevin. I mean, for us, what we run up against is, and I didn't talk about this, but one of the key requirements for success in winter barley is planting it early. It has to be established early, and that can be a challenge if the soybean crop is coming off late, or if it's a late spring and soybeans are planted late, then there just isn't the acres to plant it into because it's too late. So that can be a challenge. And then, I mean, like I mentioned, I think it'll come, but just market acceptance, finding a buyer, making it easy for the growers. Nothing will turn a grower off. Then, he can grow a successful winter wheat crop or winter barley crop, but if he can't empty his bins before soybean or corn harvest, then that leaves a real sour taste in his mouth.
Yeah, I would say that market is a good one. Also, just the risk that farmers take. So I mentioned this Forever Green Initiative. We have this very small program funded through the Minnesota Department of Ag, which is kind of like a mini crop insurance program for some of these new crops that contribute to continuous living cover. And so winter barley is one of them. So there is, I think if there were more mechanisms to protect growers from risk, then that would create a larger market for farmers who want to try growing winter barley, and then hopefully the users that want to source it. But it's kind of right now there's, like I said, there's just a handful of folks that are growing it, and so that's part. I mean, funding is always an issue. Just general bandwidth of things I have going on. There's only so much I can dedicate it to, but the focus on winter hardiness, I think, is really where we're at right now, because if we can improve that to some reasonable level of risk, then it will be hard to see it take off.
Great, thanks, guys. Brian.
Yeah, this one's primarily for Phil, although Kevin can chime in, I don't know. But Phil, for some of us have been around a long time. I used to work a lot with Les Sugar when Les was breeding barley in Ontario, and Les was a great winter barley guy.
Yep.
And one of the things that he always talked about as being a problem wasn't so much with winter hardiness from a temperature point of view, but the icing over top when fields got partly flooded in the spring and then it got cold again and it froze and so on. Is that something that's sort of disappeared in that part of Southern Ontario because of the weather changes, or is it still an issue?
No, it can still be an issue. And I think it was 2 winters ago, we had a major rain in January, major rains, and we thought, okay, here's the icing issue, and to our surprise, it got through it. So yeah, I mean, typically the crop isn't killed in the winter, it's killed in the spring.
Yeah, yeah. And are the new winter wheat varieties better to handle that better than used to as well? Yeah,
they are, Brian, but I mean, it's funny. I grew up on a farm in Northern Ontario, and then sold winter wheat for C&M seeds in the early 2000s. There was never winter wheat planted around Ottawa here. And now there's hardly any spring wheat. It was all spring wheat. Now it's the complete opposite. It's mostly all winter wheat. So things are changing. The winters are changing, and yeah. And then even in New Liskeard, we never grew winter wheat. I would not try winter barley yet up there, but I mean, lots of guys are growing winter wheat with really good success. So yeah, great question. I actually had a question for Kevin. I noticed in your germplasm you have coming through, a big chunk of it was 2-row compared to 6-row.
Mm-hmm.
And my question, is there any link between winter hardiness and 2 rows and 6 rows?
I don't think there's a genetic link. I mean, I think a lot of the sources that we've been using as having good winter hardiness happen to be 6 rows.
Okay.
But I think that's mostly because that's where the breeding is focused on that particular trait. I don't think the spike morphology itself, has an impact. One of the things that we've done in our program, is a little bit off topic, is we always selected for facultative growth habit. So one of the conditions for me starting a winter program was that it was going to have to be facultative, so I didn't have to deal with vernalization and all of the complications of a spring and a winter crop. So and interestingly, that trait doesn't seem to be related to winter survival. So you don't need to have that vernalization requirement for winter survival.
Hi, I have the next question. For those of you who don't know me, I'm at the cereal crops unit in Madison, Wisconsin. So it's nice to meet some of you virtually. My question is about the mechanism of the snow cover effect. do we know, so this could be either for Kevin or Phil, or maybe someone else in the audience. When there's no snow cover and you have winter kill, is it a photosynthesis response? Like there's not enough photosynthesis, or there's too much and we don't have the right reduction at the end? Or is it from like a lack of soil moisture? Is it essentially like a drought effect that's just occurring over the winter? Does anyone know the mechanism?
I think to some extent, it's even just an insulation effect of the snow on temperature itself, you know, at the crown. We always wanted to do more experiments where we put you know, measure the soil temperature at different depths during the winter and look at the snow depths and things like that. We have very little data on that, but certainly the snow does provide some insulation to actually modify the temperature directly. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other two things could be contributing as well, for sure.
So most likely just temperature tolerance.
I think so. I think that's a
Okay.
big, yeah.
Thanks.
I see Scott had a question just about barley straw in Ontario. I think it really the straw market in Ontario. I mean, there's some dairy farmers prefer wheat straw over barley straw. But I mean, not a dairy expert, but I know a lot of the farms now have actually gone to like sawdust and that sort of thing. So I mean, I don't think there's like, I haven't heard that, you know, barley straw is getting a big premium in the province over wheat straw. So not sure there.
Brian, do you have another question?
There's a comment on the snow cover, and that's, you need to remember that the only thing that really survives the winter is the crown tissue, which is just below the soil surface. And so it's, as Kevin said, it's strictly an insulation thing. There've been massive amounts of work done on that in the 70s and 80s here in Western Canada with winter wheat and so on. And it's strictly a blanket. And interestingly, as Phil pointed out, it doesn't have to be all that much. Just as I'm sure both Kevin and Phil will tell you, maybe not Phil so much, but Kevin, I'm sure you've seeded sometimes in the fall into pretty dry conditions. And it's amazing how little rainfall, a half an inch of rain, will bring that crop up and going, as long as there's some other moisture down a little bit lower, so that it gets a good start and that crown is in really good condition to go into the winter. But the snow is strictly a blanket. So I guess if you wanted, you could cover everything up somehow and help it survive, but I don't think that'd be very economical.
Great,
did
thank you
we
for
did
your
toy with-
response.
We did toy with the idea of using a snowmaking machine to cover our plots in the winter, but
Oh, I want to see that. What other questions do we have out there? Luke.
Hi, yeah, thanks for the talks. It resonates a lot with things over here. I was wanting to ask both of you how your thoughts on combining winter hardness and malt quality in the crop.
Yeah, Kevin, I mean, so right now we're evaluating germplasm from all over, and some of them have malt characteristics, and I mean that's a bonus, and it makes total sense because it just opens up the door for another marketing opportunity. In Ontario, the malt market here is quite small. You know, one large farm could essentially supply all the micro maltsters in Ontario, but I mean that is growing, and Quebec has a pretty large malt industry, and then into New York and that sort of thing. So we aren't specifically looking at malts, but when we find one, it's certainly of interest to us. But I mean, our first priority is for sure winter hardiness and yield, but malt is definitely a bonus. Yeah.
yeah, we are selecting for malt quality for sure. Most of the parents that we've identified through germplasm screening for winter hardiness have pretty terrible malt quality. So there's a pretty big gap there, but we definitely have made progress to improve those traits.
Cool.
I'm very excited that Kevin's got a couple lines in the ground now for us for quality evaluation program this next year. So get to start digging into that a little bit more. So that's good to hear. Well, we are at the top of the hour, so I'm sure that people have started to drop off, but I'm sure if anybody's got another question or two, we can probably entertain that. I do just want to thank everyone for joining us today. And again, I'm just going to drop in the chat the link to the North American Barley Researchers Workshop. Again, the registration is open for that, and also the call for abstracts is open. So if you plan to come to Pullman in July, would love for you to share some of your research with us. Also, just want to say again, for those that might not have caught it at the beginning, that this will be the last session in the Sustaining Barley Webinar Series, and we'll be picking back up in the fall. And a survey will be coming out soon to get some additional ideas on things that we would like, that you would like to see presented in this series. So just let it open for just another minute for any questions lingering. All right, well, I just want to thank our speakers, Kevin and Phil, for both coming in today and sharing their work. And we'll get slides and the recording posted to the website and emailed out soon. So with that, thank you everyone for today.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.